It becomes interesting then to study the culture of Africans as it is represented in the womb and as it represents itself in the bodies and behavior of African newborns. And this is the kind of work we must do. When I teach my courses in developmental psychology, I do not begin with sperm and egg, the zygote bit. That's too late. I start by asking, why do you have children? Because that reason already begins to shape them. Do you want them or don't you? Because that attitude represents itself in the womb as well. You see? And these things had to be looked at. The infants were awake a surprising amount of time, alert, watchful, happy, and calm. This staying awake, particularly in the what we call the alert and active state, is very important in infants. In my future book about the education of black children, and in another that's coming out where I talk about maximizing the intelligence of black children, we emphasize very much maintaining the children and the newborns and the infants in what we call an inactive alert state, that state where they are wide awake but are looking at the world and observing the world and taking it in and registering it in their nervous system and in their brain and already beginning to process it, you see. And the longer you can keep them in that state and show them interesting things in the world and bring them into new experiences in the world, the more accelerated their intelligence will become. The earlier they learn things, and the foundation of future intelligence is built by their being alive to the world. So this is what he's referring to here, you see, that these children are wide awake and they are looking at the world and processing this world to an extent that you don't see in the European child. At 2 days of age, 48 hours, those infants sat bolt upright, held only by forearms, with a beautifully straight back and perfect head balance, their firmly focused eyes staring intently, intelligently at their mothers, and they smiled and smiled. I wish I could have time to cover some of the material here in terms of some current work that's going on in developmental psychology today that relates what we call the child's visual behavior to later intelligence. In other words, we can now look at the child's visual responses to stimuli and auditory responses to stimuli, what we refer to as habituation responses, and note that these responses predict fairly well the intelligence of the child later on. As stated here, it has been found that a baby's performance at age 4 months and at 6 months on tests of visual memory correlate at 4 and 6 years of age. Now, when we look at these children here responding already the way they do, we know that we are dealing here with a natural intelligence. The question is, how are we going to deal with it? He goes on to state, the issue is intelligence, the brain's ability to process sensory information, organize muscular responses, and interact with the environment. I'm going to indicate what that implies. You see, there are many psychologists, white and otherwise, who would indicate that black children are motorically more advanced than white children. And of course, by that, they try to sort of give us a backhanded slap, as if these children are only motors. But my hand is moved under the direction of my brain. It's not moving spontaneously. I move it because I will its movement. These children are not little motors moving and twisting and going. Their behavior is guided and purposeful, which means then that there is a purposeful intelligence guiding their motor behavior. The behavior is psychomotor. It means then that their brains have advanced to the degree that they can translate their desires and wishes into behavioral activity. And they gain this much earlier than Europeans. Let's look at it. At 6 or 7 weeks, all 300 of these children crawled skillfully, could sit up by themselves, and would sit spellbound before a mirror looking at their own images for long periods, indicating self-awareness at a very early age. This particular ability was not expected in the American and European child before 24 weeks, 6 months. What are we saying here then? We are comparing an African child at 6 or 7 weeks with the European child at 24 weeks, or a month and a half, as against what? 6 months. That's what I mean, ladies and gentlemen, when I tell you, you have to know your own history. You have to look at the biological evolutionary history of African people to know your children. You can't go and run over to the other people. You're going to be misguided. These are not children who are colored. These are African children. And it is connected to the melanin in their bodies. This color is not mere decoration, because the melanin that colors your skin is the melanin that is a part of the brain's neurotransmitters network. The same embryonic layer that is responsible for your skin is the same embryonic layer that makes your brain. And the brain uses melanin-like substances for transmitting information within itself and between the neurons. And where you see children of color, then you see this advance in development. So color, again, is not something that just happens. It is a part and parcel of everything else that we are. We must recognize that. Between 6 and 7 months, the Ugandan children performed the toy box retrieval test. Shabir showed the infant a toy, walked across the room, put the toy in a tall toy box. The child leaped up, ran across the room, and retrieved the toy. Besides the sensory motor skills of walking and retrieval, the test showed that object constancy had taken place, the greatest shift of logic in the brain, at which point an object out of sight is no longer out of mind. In other words, he's stating here, if you are to show a child a toy at this age, and then you hide the toy, and yet the child goes and retrieves the toy, it means then that the child must be capable of mentally representing the toy in its mind. You see, if it were not capable of representing that toy, then it could not remember to go and find it even though it's out of sight. And this is one of the ways we as developmental psychologists test early mental development. And we get some idea of the mental maturity of infants. Because early in life, to put a toy or stimulus in a child's face and then remove it, as far as the child is concerned, at a certain point in development, the toy has just completely disappeared. Meaning at that point, they have not developed a sufficient mental apparatus to represent the absent toy in their minds. So when these children then can go and find that hidden toy, it means then that they have developed the mental apparatus, the mental representational abilities to find that toy that is not found in European children at this age. The test successfully completed by the Ugandan children between 6 and 7 months of age was not to be expected until somewhere between the 15th and 18th months.